From Doakes staring through the bars of that Everglades cage, to Deborah frozen in the church as Dexter's knife hangs over Travis Marshall, to Trinity smiling across a suburban dinner table, the series keeps returning to the same impossible image. The serial killer in plain sight, surrounded by cops, surrounded by family, surrounded by victims who never knew they were already on his table. Throughout his life, Dexter Morgan lives on the edge of exposure. Yet, moment after moment, the danger passes. The question lingers. How was he always this far ahead? Let's kick things off with that montage in mind. Doakes finding the blood slides. Lagerta connecting the Bay Harbor butcher to the shipping container. Deborah walking into a kill room 1 second too late. Each close call feels like an accident Dexter narrowly escapes. But viewed together, they reveal something else. A long-term covert operation, running quietly inside Miami Metro, with Dexter as both architect and asset. He is not just a man with homicidal urges. He is a strategist who treats every day of his life as a mission. The series actually shows the machinery behind that mission if the focus shifts from the kills to the systems. Harry's code is more than a moral rulebook. It functions as Dexter's operating system. As a child, Harry stages mock crime scenes, drilling Dexter to think like a detective and a predator at the same time. Check for witnesses, control the narrative, leave no trace. This would be the start of a mindset where every potential slip is pre-imagined, rehearsed, and filed away as a contingency plan. Layered on top of that is Dexter's professional cover. Blood spatter analysis is not a random career choice. It gives him early access to evidence, to case files, to the raw data of other people's crimes. When Dexter stands in a pool of blood, describing impact patterns, he is also quietly auditing his own methods, learning from every mistake other killers make. Miami Metro becomes both workplace and shield, a place where his presence at crime scenes is expected, where his dark passenger can move under the fluorescent lights of bureaucracy. Then there is social camouflage, the awkward jokes, the coffee runs, the image of a harmless lab rat who loves routine more than risk. Each relationship becomes a potential risk factor that Dexter tries to manage. Deborah's need for connection, Rita's desire for stability, Doakes' suspicion, Lagerta's ambition. The more emotionally entangled, everyone around him but Dexter. Yet only a surprisingly small circle either knew or strongly suspected the truth about his urges to kill. Each of those people becomes a data point, a case study in how Dexter stayed 10 steps ahead until the gap finally closed. The numerical hook is simple. Count everyone who discovered, almost discovered, or deeply felt the dark passenger. Then track what it cost them. To do that, we're going to dive deep into a specific group. Harry, who first identified the urges and wrote the code. Brian, who recognized the darkness without rules. Doakes, whose instincts cut through the mask. Deborah, whose love and trauma collided with the truth. Rita, Lundy, Lagerta, Hannah, and a few others who interacted with Dexter's facade in a way that forced him to change his strategy. Each one had access to a different version of Dexter, and the contrast between those versions will show how deliberate the performance really was. Equally important is what this project will leave out. Random victims on the table, one-off near misses in alleyways, and background cops who mumble suspicions but never act will not be the focus. Those encounters matter for tension, but they do not alter Dexter's operating system. The emphasis stays on people whose knowledge or near knowledge actually reshapes his choices. moving kill rooms, abandoning trophies, breaking Harry's code, or, eventually, running. Structurally, this will play like a documentary-style essay. Season by season, then character by character, the narrative will loop through key plot beats and tie them back to Harry's training, the language of the code, and the slow erosion of Dexter's advantage. Early on, that advantage looks almost flawless. Childhood rehearsals with staged crime scenes, a career in blood spatter analysis that lets him erase his own traces, and a carefully cultivated, harmless lab tech persona that keeps suspicion deflected. Over time, this would be the start of a different pattern. Emotional attachments intensify. The dark passenger stops being purely managed, and Dexter begins to violate his own protocols. The long-term effects of those small breaches will be tracked as closely as the big revelations, because the show quietly signals his decline long before the final unmasking. Let's kick things off with the person who built the system. In the first place, Harry Morgan, the architect of the code that made Dexter nearly untouchable, and the first one destroyed by its consequences. Harry Morgan was the first person to understand that Dexter did not just witness a crime, he was forged by one. Editor, planning the kill, then as the cop, dissecting the evidence. Throughout his life, Dexter would replay those early drills, asking what Harry would notice, what a forensics team would log, which mistake would put handcuffs on his wrists. In doing this, Harry split Dexter's perception. Dexter learned to think in two timelines at once, the kill in the present and the investigation in the future. When adult Dexter wraps a body in plastic, bleaches every surface, and dismembers victims over a drain, that precision is not improvisation. It is the direct extension of a childhood where every hypothetical murder ended with Harry pointing at a footprint, a hair, a tire track, and saying, "This is where they catch you." The moral cost of that decision is enormous. Harry was a cop who lost faith in the system, so he built a killer designed to beat the system from the inside. He taught Dexter search warrant procedures, interrogation tactics, how detectives build timelines, and pressure suspects. The result is a son whose instincts mirror a homicide detective's, but whose loyalty belongs to his own code instead of the law. Harry optimizes Dexter not just to kill, but to outmaneuver colleagues. Harry works beside every day. That early conditioning explains Dexter's later life with disturbing clarity. His choice of blood spatter analyst is not random. It is a strategic role that maximizes access to crime scenes and case files while masking his own crimes. His meticulous kill rooms, his obsessive pre-kill surveillance, his habit of mentally running through how Masuka, LaGuerta, or Doakes would read a scene before acting. All of it is Harry's training, executed with adult resources. And when Dexter starts drifting from that training, the long-term effects of even small deviations from the code will set up the next wave of people who discover the truth and pay the consequences. Harry's choice to build a system around Dexter's urges becomes much more than a moral compromise. It becomes Dexter's operating system. Every kill, every cover story, every near miss with discovery runs through the same invisible software, the code. Let's kick things off with how that code turns into concrete protocols. Throughout his life, Dexter is trained to treat potential victims like open cases. Background checks before bloodshed. He digs into arrest records, sealed files, even gossip from Miami Metro to confirm guilt. Then he studies pattern, how the victims hurt others when they strike, what they leave behind. The ice truck killer, the human trafficker. If Doakes would look for drag marks, Dexter eliminates them. If LaGuerta would question access, he manufactures a different suspect profile. The code demands that every kill be survivable as a case file. After the kill, another protocol kicks in. Personal QA. Dexter reviews each step in his mind, replaying the abduction, the restraints, the knife, the cleanup. Then he audits the outside world. Morning news, internal memos, hallway chatter at Miami Metro. He listens for his own name, for any hint that someone discovered a pattern. The bloodslide trophies are not just mementos. They are a physical index of successful audits, proof that the system still works. Emotionally, the code gives Dexter structure and purpose. It tells the dark passenger when it may kill and how it must behave. Over time, that structure hardens into overconfidence. If the rules are followed, he believes, the consequences will always fall on someone else. This would be the start of a dangerous illusion that the operating system is flawless and that anyone who suspects him can be managed. But the long-term effects of that illusion are fatal. The moment Dexter bends the code for personal revenge, love, or convenience, those carefully managed risks begin to stack. The rehearsals grow sloppy, the audits miss details, and the operating system starts to glitch, opening the door for the next person who will get close enough to see the truth behind the plastic. Those glitches don't start with a chase or a confession. They start in the lab. Because before Dexter is the Bay Harbor butcher, he is Miami Metro's blood guy, and that job is the quiet engine that keeps him 10 steps ahead of everyone hunting the truth. Let's kick things off with the career choice itself. Dexter doesn't accidentally land in forensics. Harry trains him to think like both predator and cop, and blood spatter analysis becomes the perfect compromise. It puts Dexter at fresh crime scenes, in evidence rooms, and inside closed-door briefings without raising suspicion. He is the one person everyone expects to be obsessed with blood, trajectory, and impact patterns. The dark passenger hides in plain sight, wearing a lab coat. Throughout his life, that access functions like an early warning system. When a new killer appears in Miami, Dexter is among the first to see the crime scene photos and the raw blood evidence. He studies how these killers fail. If a victim fights back and leaves defensive wounds, he adjusts his restraints. If blood cast off on a ceiling leads the department straight to a murder weapon, he refines his labeled there, an educated guess about blood directionality that points the squad away from his own hunting grounds. This dual role makes him both Miami Metro's quality control and its hidden saboteur. On one level, he genuinely improves their work, catching overlooked patterns, tightening timelines, helping put real killers away. On another, he knows exactly which conclusions to suggest to protect his double life. The same precision that makes him an elite analyst makes him a terrifyingly efficient editor of reality. But this would be the start of a new vulnerability. Not everyone in the department is satisfied with clean reports and tidy arcs. Characters like Doakes and LaGuerta begin to notice the gap between Dexter's harmless facade and the uncanny accuracy of his insights, and that forensic advantage will soon collide with colleagues who refuse to stop at the lab coat. That gap between the lab coat and the killer is where Dexter's most important invention lives, the harmless outsider mask that keeps everyone looking everywhere but at him. Let's kick things off with how carefully that persona is built. In public, Dexter is awkward but helpful, emotionally muted but relentlessly reliable. He's the guy who brings donuts every morning, who runs evidence without complaining, who makes a dry, morbid joke about dismemberment in the bullpen, and gets brushed off as Dexter being Dexter. That pattern of small, predictable quirks creates a script for his coworkers, so they stop asking who he really is and start accepting who he presents himself to be. Throughout his life, Dexter refines this mask to exploit a basic cognitive bias. Most people imagine serial killers as visibly monstrous, explosive, or charismatic predators, not as the quiet blood spatter analyst who stays late to finish reports and never causes office drama. The Miami Metro team hunts monsters, so the mind naturally filters out anyone who does not match that mental profile. Dexter understands that filter. His whole performance is calibrated to fall safely outside the silhouette of the predator everyone thinks they are tracking. This plays out constantly in the office dynamics. Masuka is allowed to be the overt creep, filling the space with sleazy comments and inappropriate laughter, so attention gravitates toward him whenever a line is crossed. Batista is the emotional center, wearing his heart on his sleeve, crying over victims and divorces, becoming the guy colleagues worry about. Deborah is the loud, chaotic presence, swearing, storming, and demanding to be heard. Blaine. As those cracks widen, Dexter's 10-step lead stops being guaranteed, and the social camouflage that once protected him becomes a fragile layer over a truth that is getting harder to contain. Those fractures in Dexter's performance become fault lines the moment Brian Moser enters the story. On the surface, the ice truck killer is a clever adversary, a theatrical murderer taunting Miami Metro with severed limbs and crime scene puzzles. But if we're going to dive deep, Brian isn't discovering Dexter at all. He is recognizing him. Throughout his life, Dexter believed Harry was the only one who had truly seen the dark passenger that was born in that shipping container. Brian shatters that belief. He witnessed the same chainsaw massacre of their mother, the same river of blood, the same primal imprint that fused killing urges with survival. Where Dexter's trauma was filtered through Harry's code, Brian's was left completely unrestrained. This would be the start of a confrontation not between hunter and prey, but between two different answers to the same childhood horror. Let's kick things off with how Brian stages his kills. The dismembered bodies, the perfectly drained blood, the doll parts left for Dexter are usually read as taunts aimed at the police. In reality, they function as a private language. Each tableau mirrors Dexter's inner world, clean, controlled, ritualized. Brian is not asking, "Can the cops catch me?" He is asking, "Are you still the child from the container, or has Harry's training erased who we really are?" The crime scenes are tests, measuring whether Dexter will follow the clues, remember the origin of his urges, and embrace the truth Brian already knows. That pressure creates a new kind of internal conflict. For the first time, Dexter is not 10 steps ahead by hiding. He is being invited to stop running entirely. Brian offers a life without rules, without masks, where there is no need to juggle blood spatter reports by day and plastic wrap victims by night. No Harry, no code, no pretending to care about office birthdays or family dinners. Just brothers, killing without consequences, beyond their own pleasure. In Brian's vision, strategy becomes unnecessary because there is no one left to deceive. Dexter's choice in that abandoned building with Deborah, strapped to the table, is an event that changed everything. Faced with the one person who fully knows and accepts him, he chooses Harry's code over Brian's freedom. He kills his brother to save Deb, and in doing so, recommits to the exhausting discipline of concealment. The long test video. He watches which detectives arrive late, which officers forget to seal a bag, which sergeant signs a form without reading it. Throughout his life, Harry taught him to see procedure as both shield and weapon. Season 1 shows Dexter applying that lesson in real time. Pay attention to the small, easily missed behaviors. Dexter notices when Batista relies on hunches instead of paperwork, when Lagerta chases media attention more than chain of custody details, when Deb is so desperate for approval that she overlooks anomalies to close a case. He logs who cuts corners, who is drowning in personal drama, who is too exhausted to question one more discrepancy in a lab report. Those are not casual observations. They are a live vulnerability map. This would be the start of Dexter's most effective cover. Strategic helpfulness. He constantly volunteers for tasks that expand his data access. He offers to process extra blood, stays late to finish reports, quietly double-checks evidence for accuracy. On the surface, he is the ideal coworker. Underneath, he is building a private backdoor into Miami Metro's information flow, ensuring that any trace of his own kills can be intercepted, edited, or redirected before anyone else even sees it. Office gossip becomes another layer of intelligence. Masuka's oversharing is not just comic relief, it is an informal intel network. Through Masuka, Dexter learns who is under internal investigation, who is in line for promotion, where the brass is focusing pressure this week. A throwaway comment about budget cuts tells him which labs will be understaffed. A rumor about doakes and a shooting gives him a read on who is already under suspicion. That background noise guides tactical choice, when to take risks, when to disappear into routine. Seen this way, Season 1 stops being just the origin of the ice truck killer mystery and becomes an event that changed how Dexter runs his entire life. Once Dexter is understood as a quiet intelligence officer embedded in Miami Metro, later confrontations with Doakes, Lundy, and Lagerta feel different. They are not unlucky breaks. They are the long-term effects of operating inside a system that is slowly correcting for its blind spots. The more the department professionalizes, the narrower Dexter's lead becomes, setting up the next phase of people who discovered the truth and paid the consequences for stepping into his carefully managed shadow. Those long-term effects find composure and refusing to laugh it off when others do, while the rest of the department leans into the harmless lab geek narrative. Doakes keeps repeating a simple, dangerous idea. There is something wrong with this man. Dexter, used to being underestimated, initially treats Doakes as background noise, another angry cop with authority issues, not a systemic threat to his life. That miscalculation is important. It shows how thoroughly Harry's training and the success of the code have convinced Dexter that professional suspicion can always be managed with charm, clean forensics, and a carefully chosen victim list. Doakes does not fit that model. He is not impressed by evidence. He is not soothed by small talk, and he is not interested in Dexter's projected innocence. As Doakes keeps pushing, Dexter is forced to reallocate mental bandwidth from external hunting to internal security. Suddenly, routine changes. fewer solo visits to crime scenes where Dexter can quietly erase traces of his own kills, more elaborate alibis that account for Doakes tailing his car or popping up uninvited. Dexter starts running counter-surveillance in his own workplace, checking mirrors, tracking who is where, adding new contingency plans in case Doakes follows him to a potential victim. The long-term effects of Doakes' presence are huge. Every advantage Harry and Miami Metro have given Dexter: access to case files, knowledge of procedure, the blood spatter expertise that once guaranteed safety, now has to be weaponized defensively. Doakes will not just suspect, he will investigate, break rules, and go off book. The question becomes, can Dexter stay 10 steps ahead of someone who refuses to play by the same system he has mastered? The next phase of their conflict will answer that, and it will come with consequences far beyond either man's control. Doakes, going off book, forces Dexter into a new mode, not just hiding, but actively hunting the man who is hunting him. From this point on, every glance, every tale, every crime scene becomes a two-way mirror where each man is measuring how far the other is willing to go. Let's kick things off with Dexter's counter-surveillance. Doakes follows Dexter to remote locations, watches his late-night drives, and pushes past normal departmental rules. Dexter responds by tracking the tracker. He clocks Doakes' car in his rearview, times how long Doakes waits outside his apartment, and even engineers mundane detours to test his persistence. Throughout his life, Dexter has watched predators, so cannot let the truth leave that room. The result is a high-risk stalemate, where Dexter feeds, guards, and debates the man who has truly discovered him, all while his own life outside begins to fracture. Under the pressure of maintaining two parallel realities, Leela enters as an unplanned variable. Her obsession and instability collide with the cabin's secret when she follows Dexter, breaks in, and sees Doakes caged. Dexter never intends for her to become an executioner. Yet, his pattern of manipulation and half-truths gives her the narrative. Doakes is dangerous. Dexter is worth protecting at any cost. When Lila burns the cabin, killing Doakes and framing him as the Bay Harbor butcher, Dexter's dark passenger survives technically clean, but morally complicit. The long-term effects of this are brutal. Dexter has allowed an innocent man to die for his secret, proving that his 10-step lead can be preserved not only through his own kills, but through the collateral deaths he orchestrates. The question now is how many more lives that strategy will quietly consume before anyone else sees the pattern. From an innocent joke about being a robot to watching her brother plunge a knife into Travis Marshall, Dexter Morgan has always been the emotional fault line running under Dexter's carefully managed double life. Throughout his life, Dexter could stay 10 steps ahead of detectives, killers, and federal agents. But Deborah represented something far more dangerous, someone who loved him enough to keep looking when the evidence did not add up. Let's kick things off with those early instincts. Long before Deborah discovered any concrete truth, she kept circling the same complaints. Dexter was distant, detached, hard to read. Her constant robot jokes were not just comic relief. They were her language for describing a brother who did not react like other people. Deborah begs Dexter to open up. He gives her blank, polite smiles. She explodes in frustration, sensing that he is hiding something massive, even if there is no way to imagine a dark passenger and a kill room behind that calm face. Dexter's response is calculated. He does not deny the damage. He redirects it. Harry's favoritism and their shared childhood trauma become both shield and distraction. When Deborah calls him out for being cold, Dexter leans on the narrative Harry created. They were both broken by that shipping container, but Dexter was the special one. Harry trained and protected. This would be the start of a pattern where every emotional gap is also a manipulation. All of this is leading toward the church. Every time Dexter outmaneuvers Deborah's questions, he is not just preserving his secret. He is quietly raising the stakes of the eventual betrayal. When she finally walks into that abandoned church and sees Dexter kill Travis Marshall, the shock is powered by years of those robot jokes, half explanations, and near misses snapping into focus at once. The real question is how that revelation will reshape not only Deborah's loyalty, but Dexter's entire belief that love and murder can coexist without consequences. That belief that love and murder could occupy the same space without colliding is exactly what Dexter tries to prove with Rita Bennett. She is not just a girlfriend who eventually becomes a wife. She is the domestic architecture that keeps the Bay Harbor butcher hidden in plain sight. Let's kick things off with Dexter's initial choice. He does not stumble into Rita. He selects her. Rita is traumatized by her abusive ex-husband, Paul. She is cautious, exhausted, and openly uninterested in sex. For most people, that would be a red flag. For Dexter, it is a feature. A partner who does not demand intimacy, who apologizes for not needing more, creates the perfect low-maintenance cover relationship. Throughout his life, Dexter has been trained by Harry to minimize variables. Rita, in her pain and passivity, looks like the safest variable imaginable. From there, suburban routine becomes an invisible security system. School runs, pediatrician visits, birthday parties, and backyard barbecues all generate a constant stream of witnesses and timestamps. Dexter is at Astor's recital. He is grilling at a neighborhood cookout. He is assembling a crib for baby Harrison. The calendar fills with events that can be cited by coworkers, neighbors, and even Deborah, giving Dexter a natural alibi network without elaborate lies. The domestic noise drowns out the silence of his kill rooms. But the relationship is not purely strategic. Over time, Dexter's genuine affection for Rita and the kids becomes a double-edged sword. Loving them makes the mask more convincing because the emotions are real. At the same time, those emotions are something Harry's code never fully anticipated. The code teaches procedure: never get caught, choose victims carefully, control the dark passenger. It does not explain what to do when Harrison reaches for Dexter's hand right after a kill, or when Astor calls him the only good man in her life. The long-term effect that protects him into the place where his greatest vulnerability is exposed. To see how fragile that domestic facade really is, we have to zoom out and look at Dexter's life as if it were a project plan, not a personality. Throughout his life, Dexter is not just a serial killer hiding in plain sight. He is essentially a full-time project manager of murder, running parallel workflows that should not be able to coexist. Let's kick things off with the roles he is juggling at any given moment. By day, he is a blood spatter analyst for Miami Metro, the quiet technician who explains patterns of violence to other detectives. At night, he is a vigilante killer, stalking targets that fit Harry's code. Around that, he plays boyfriend and later husband, stepfather to Astor and Cody, eventually father to Harrison, and still brother to Deborah. He is also a coworker, navigating office politics with Doakes, Masuka, LaGuardia, and Quinn, and in secret, a crime scene janitor who erases his own footprints before anyone else even knows they exist. If this life is laid out like a project management board, it looks less like a calendar and more like a war room. One color for kills and pre-kill recon, another for evidence disposal and trophy maintenance, a third for family obligations, school events, date nights, Harrison's doctor appointments, a fourth for workplace demands, briefings, autopsies, ride-alongs. Each card has dependencies. A kill cannot be scheduled until the background check is complete, the plastic is ready, the kill room is secured, and an alibi has been preloaded into his family and coworkers' expectations. His checklists mirror police procedure because Harry trained him to think like both investigator and suspect. Pre-kill recon means surveillance, verification of the target's guilt, and testing the location. Execution is timed down to the minute. Injection, restraint, confrontation with the truth. Kill. Cleanup is a forensic audit, using the same knowledge that lets him read blood to make sure none of his own is left behind. Then comes alibi verification, where he checks that phone records, work logs, and witnesses can place him somewhere innocent. Finally, there is the emotional reset and the monitoring phase, watching news reports and colleagues' reactions for investigative ripples. This hyper-structured life leaves almost no slack. One sick child, one surprise visit from Deborah, one sudden case that demands he ride along to a crime scene at the exact moment a body needs to be dumped can collapse the entire schedule. The show Ring, tracking serial killers until their patterns crack open and the truth spills out. Lundy is the anti-Dexter. Throughout his life, Dexter has hidden his killing urges behind jokes, social awkwardness, and a carefully managed image of harmlessness. Lundy, by contrast, moves through the squad room with quiet authority, mapping bodies, timelines, and disposal sites. In his head, the way Dexter maps plastic sheeting and kill room drainage. He is meticulous, data-driven, and patient, the kind of hunter who believes no predator is truly invisible. The pattern is always there if someone disciplined enough is willing to stare at it long enough. Lundy's arrival subtly tightens Dexter's entire world. Up to this point, Dexter has relied on being the only one in the room who can see the larger design behind apparently disconnected victims. Now, for the first time, there is someone on the task force who thinks in similar layers, who treats the Bay Harbor Butcher as a coherent intelligence rather than a random monster. When Lundy lays out his profile, a methodical offender with access to case files, forensic knowledge, and an internal code that targets only the guilty, he is unknowingly describing Dexter down to the operating system Harry installed. We're going to dive deep into how uncomfortable those moments become. In briefing scenes, Lundy calmly walks the team through dump site clusters, boat access points, and missing criminals who were last seen in police custody. Each new slide on the projector shrinks Dexter's 10-step lead into something smaller and more fragile. Dexter is forced to adjust in real time, moderating his facial reactions, cutting back on kills, and even changing how he talks about the butcher, so his comments do not echo Lundy's profile too perfectly. This creates a complex emotional response. Dexter admires Lundy's craft, the way a chess player respects a grandmaster, studying the same board from the opposite side. At the same time, there is real fear. If anyone can compress his margin of safety from 10 steps to a single misstep, it is this man who refuses to be distracted by office politics or emotional noise. Lundy does not suspect Dexter directly, but his relentless logic closes off Dexter's usual escape routes before Dexter can even test them. Lundy's presence also interacts with the other pressures closing in. Doakes is already shadowing Dexter, driven by instinct rather than data. LaGuerta is chasing promotions and legacy cases, hungry for the career-making arrest that the Bay Harbor butcher could provide. Pull up body after body, each one a mirror of his process, each one a possible thread back to Miami Metro, and the quiet, blood-spatter analyst who processed so many of those original cases. This would be the start of a new phase where his trophies are no longer symbols of control. They are exhibits in a federal case. Dexter's response is immediate triage. He mentally audits the entire chain of evidence. Who logged those missing persons? Which detectives worked? Which scenes? What lab reports might show a consistent signature? He knows exactly which victims could, on paper, intersect with his life, and which ones look random. From inside Miami Metro, he maps out every investigative path Lundy might take, and starts quietly deciding which ones have to die. His forensic access becomes both shield and weapon. Dexter can mislabel trace evidence, delay DNA comparisons, and lose minor samples in the chaos of a high-profile case. When the task force sends over new remains, he frames the blood patterns as chaotic, impulsive, nudging the profile away from a meticulous insider. At the same time, he gently steers conversation toward Sergeant Doakes, who already reads as a dangerous loner in the squad room. We're going to dive deep into how calculated that framing really is. Doakes has a temper, a special ops background, and open hostility toward Dexter. Lundy is looking for someone disciplined, violent, and emotionally isolated. Dexter makes sure lab delays and selective emphasis on certain reports keep that picture intact. The more Doakes follows his dark passenger, the more Dexter lets the data underline it. But this control comes at a cost. For the first time, Dexter is not 10 steps ahead. By comfort, he is sprinting just to stay level. Lundy's calm, methodical presence unnerves him because it reflects Harry's training without Harry's love. Every new body recovered forces Dexter to recalculate. If Lundy connects victim overlap, if Deborah mentions his late nights, if one coworker notices a discrepancy in his reports, the entire code collapses. The long-term effects of this pressure crack his system, revealing that even Harry's design has an upper limit when the hunter is this patient. The investigation ends with a haunting irony. Dexter survives Bay Harbor not by outthinking Lundy in some flawless masterstroke, but by allowing an innocent man to die in his place. Doakes' death in the cabin fire, framed as the butcher's last stand, stains Harry's code permanently. The idea that a man so rigid about rules would secretly kill dozens of victims. On the surface, it looks like loyalty to an old partner. Underneath, this would be the start of a slow, methodical audit of the truth Miami Metro has just sold to the public. For seasons, that audit plays out in the background. LaGuerta notices that the Bay Harbor evidence chain is a little too neat. She remembers Dexter's proximity to the case, the way the blood slide box was discovered, the way Lila's cabin fire tied a bow on everything. She does not have Doakes' instinct, but she has a long memory and access to every file. Each doubt goes into an invisible folder in her mind, waiting for the right political moment. Dexter initially reads La Huerta as a political animal, not an investigative one. To him, she is the captain who chases headlines, flirts with reporters, and maneuvers for promotions. That misread is one of his quietest but most important mistakes. Because a political operator does not need to catch a killer in the act. A political operator only needs a pattern that can be turned into a career-defining revelation. Administrative power becomes a different kind of threat than Doakes ever was. La Huerta can reopen Bay Harbor, pull old evidence, and reassign detectives like Deborah to cases that circle closer to Dexter. She can order audits, request lab reports, and compare blood slide signatures without stepping into a dark alley. From Dexter's vantage point in the lab, a knife, plastic, and Harry's code cannot counter a captain with a pen and a password. When we're going to dive deep into the later seasons, La Huerta's long memory finally converges with that paper trail. New bodies, familiar methods, and a stray blood slide at a crime scene reawaken every doubt she has ever filed away. The only explanation that fits across years of closed cases and convenient resolutions is Dexter Morgan. La Huerta's pivot from background operator to primary antagonist is not an event that changed her. It is the moment her quiet suspicions mature into open prosecution, setting up the next escalation in Dexter's fight to stay 10 steps ahead. La Huerta's suspicions, going public, feel like a turning point, but they also expose something the show has been quietly staging from the very beginning. What if La Huerta is not an exception at all, but just the first person willing to say out loud what everyone else has already felt in passing? Too long, awkward silences after his darker jokes land flat in the break room. Quick glances exchanged over his head when he volunteers a bit too much detail about a killer's mindset. The blocking often places Dexter slightly apart from the group, close enough to belong on paper, but visually isolated, as if everyone is keeping an unconscious radius around him. Seen this way, his 10-step lead is not pure invisibility. It becomes a constant, fragile negotiation where Harry's code is only half the story. The other half is everyone else's decision not to look too closely, not to follow that unsettling hunch to its logical conclusion. The consequences of truly investigating Dexter would be devastating. Deborah's entire career, Rita's family, Batista's faith in the badge, the closed cases that gave victims' families closure. So the system and the people inside it quietly choose ignorance. This would be the start of Dexter's most dangerous illusion, the belief that this unspoken agreement is permanent. By the time the Trinity era arrives, Dexter treats that social blind spot as a guarantee, assuming he can expand his life, take bigger risks, and still stay ahead. The pattern interrupt here is brutal. Trinity mirrors Dexter's double life, exposes the cracks in the code, and shows what happens when someone else plays the same game without caring about the long-term effects of being discovered. Trinity is where Dexter's illusion of control meets a terrifying reality check. Arthur Mitchell is not just another target. He is living proof that a serial killer can hide in plain sight for decades, raising a family, building a reputation, and leaving a trail of carefully patterned bodies behind. Throughout his life, Dexter believed Harry's code and meticulous routines made him unique. Arthur shatters that belief. As the so-called Trinity killer, he has been killing for over 30 years, cycling through his ritual of bathtub, rooftop, and burial murders while maintaining the image of a devout, church-going family man. In Arthur, Dexter doesn't just see a case, he sees an older, more experienced version of himself, someone whose dark passenger has been successfully managed over an entire adult life. That is why Dexter becomes fascinated instead of simply focused. Arthur represents a blueprint Dexter desperately wants to believe in, a model where the urges never fade, but the consequences never catch up. If Arthur can keep a wife, children, a stable home, and still kill on schedule, then maybe Dexter's double life is not a temporary balancing act. Volatility becomes an event that changed Dexter's operational style. Instead of controlled hunts, there are frantic confrontations in public spaces, last-minute chases, and desperate attempts to manage both Trinity and Miami Metro's parallel investigation. Dexter believes he can study Arthur, copy the good parts of his model, and discard the rest. The truth is that Arthur's chaos is already bleeding into Dexter's life. The most dangerous consequence is psychological. Dexter convinces himself that because he has discovered Arthur's secret, he therefore understands and controls him. That arrogance blinds him to the possibility that Trinity can strike back, not just at random victims, but at Dexter's own family. The show seeds this as a slow burning threat, a quiet countdown toward a catastrophic price for underestimating the one killer who truly mirrored him. In the next section, that price finally comes due, and Dexter's belief that he could stay ahead of Arthur is exposed as the deadliest miscalculation of his entire life. That catastrophic price doesn't begin with a body. It begins with an idea. Dexter looks at Trinity and decides this is not just a target, but a template, a living blueprint for how to be a family man and an apex predator at the same time. Let's kick things off with Dexter's surveillance turning into aspiration. He follows Arthur Mitchell into church, watches him sing hymns with his family, lead prayer circles, and organize charity builds for homeless shelters. At home, Dexter studies the backyard barbecues, the grace at dinner, the hugs that look, on the surface, effortless. Throughout his life, Dexter has treated other killers as puzzles to be solved. With Arthur, he upgrades that. He tries to reverse engineer not just how Trinity kills, but how he appears so devout, loving, and harmless. The tragedy is that the cracks are visible from the start, but Dexter's dark passenger edits the footage. We see the flinch in Jonah's shoulders when Arthur raises his voice, the frozen smile on Sally's face, the daughter's eyes tracking exits instead of people. The house feels staged, every room arranged around Arthur's moods, like an emotional crime scene where the weapon is control. But Dexter, hunting a model for his own double life, filters those warning signs out as background noise. He discovers the logistics of Trinity's routine, not the terror that routine produces. As Dexter invests more time shadowing Arthur's family, the long-term effects on his own life are immediate. Stakeouts replace date. Model is also circling as a predator, reading the same gaps Dexter is creating. And while Dexter remains 10 steps ahead in the hunt, he never realizes that in the quiet spaces he vacates, those late nights, those missed calls, someone else is stepping in. The proof of that blind spot will appear in a bathroom soaked in blood, and in the next section, we're going to dive deep into how Rita's fate exposes the one place Dexter's strategy could never protect. The proof finally arrives in that bathroom, a scene that looks like Dexter's origin story replayed against his will, and an event that changed his confidence in ever staying ahead of the dark passenger he serves. Let's kick things off with the illusion Dexter is operating under in the final stretch of the Trinity arc. He believes Arthur Mitchell is contained. The pattern is mapped, the family is identified, the timeline feels predictable. Dexter stalks Arthur, sabotages his car, isolates him, and funnels every variable toward one outcome. Arthur on the table. In Dexter's mind, once that plastic is wrapped and the knife goes in, the threat is over, the case is closed, and his family is safe again. Throughout his life, the code has trained him to think this way. Identify the victim, confirm guilt, control the environment, kill, clean, disappear. With Doakes, with Miguel, with countless other victims, that sequence has worked. So when Dexter finally corners Arthur, taunts him, and delivers the ritual kill, he believes he has once again ended the story before anyone else even discovered the full truth of the danger. The show reverses that expectation in the cruelest possible way. Dexter comes home, hears the phone, and learns Rita never made it to the airport. The quiet dread builds as he walks into the house, then toward the bathroom. The door opens, and the visual horror is immediate. Rita dead in the tub, throat cut, water red. Harrison on the floor, sitting in a pool of blood, crying. It is a direct mirror of the shipping container, of Laura Moser, of the child Dexter staring at carnage while Harry stands in the doorway. The circle is complete, and in that instant, the carefully constructed life cracks. Rita's death is not just a shocking twist. It is the logical consequence of Dexter underestimating Arthur's reach and overestimating his own ability to manage the timeline. Dexter assumed that because he was tracking Trinity, Trinity was not tracking him. He believed his double life was compartmentalized, that his family existed outside the blast radius with Deborah and Harrison, as every new discovery cuts closer to home. That shattered confidence in the blood-smeared bathroom doesn't stay in that house. It infects Dexter's entire inner system. The dark passenger that once felt like a cold, separate presence now fuses with grief, rage, and denial, turning Harry's carefully engineered operating system into a glitching program. Throughout his life, Dexter treated the dark passenger as something to be managed, boxed in by the code, and supervised by Harry's imagined voice. Before Rita, that voice functioned like a strict project manager, demanding research, surveillance, and airtight kill rooms. After Rita, the lines blur. The dark passenger is no longer just about urges to kill guilty victims. It is wrapped around the image of Rita in the bathtub, Harrison in blood, and the belief that this is an event that changed everything because Dexter failed to stay 10 steps ahead. Let's kick things off with how that emotional contamination shows up in the kills themselves. Post-Rita, Dexter rushes. He goes after Boyd Fowler in Season 5 almost immediately, turning a spontaneous body disposal partnership with Lumen into a kill that barely fits the code. There is research, but it is accelerated, driven by the need to punish someone who reminds him of his own failure to protect. Later, with Jordan Chase and his circle, the targets technically qualify, yet the planning is sloppier, full of improvisation and shared risk. Dexter is not just eliminating predators, he is trying to rewrite the narrative of Rita's death through each new victim. At the same time, Harry's presence becomes argumentative rather than directive. We're going to dive deep into those scenes where the ghost of Harry urges restraint while Dexter pushes forward. When Dexter stalks Trinity's family after Rita's death, Harry warns that this is about vengeance, not the code. Dexter ignores him. When he pursues Lumen's attackers, Harry points out the exposure risk and the fact that Lumen is an unpredictable partner. Dexter insists on continuing, driven by guilt and a need to share the truth of his life with someone who has seen his worst consequences up close. This internal civil war leaks into his external world. Dexter starts missing cues from Deborah, brushing off her questions, arriving late, or vanishing at critical investigative moments. His interactions with Harrison grow colder and more mechanical, as if parenting is just another cover identity rather than a real choice. The harmless outsider mask begins to crack. Emotional. Quinn has survived on instinct, gossip, and reading people. He notices Dexter's blankness. He notices the convenient absences. He notices that the blood guy with the awkward smile keeps ending up in the orbit of major cases and major deaths. Curiosity mixes with jealousy, especially once Rita is dead and Dexter's personal life looks both tragic and opaque. Let's kick things off with how low level that danger feels at first. Quinn does not open a formal investigation. There is no task force, no official memo. Instead, he runs quiet background checks, pulls Dexter's records, and starts asking casual questions about Rita's past. He follows Dexter in an unmarked car. He watches him disappear into the night and reappear with flimsy explanations. This would be the start of a shadow file, built not in evidence lockers, but in Quinn's head and in a few unofficial notes that never quite make it into the system. What makes Quinn so threatening is that his suspicions grow out of the social fabric of the squad room. Office gossip turns dangerous. He hears Deborah defending Dexter a little too fiercely. He hears neighbors talk about how Dexter never really lost his temper, even when his life was falling apart. For a detective used to messy human reactions, that calm reads as a tell. The dark passenger does not flash teeth here. It hides behind PTA meetings, grief counseling, and a father trying to keep his son safe. Dexter's response to this tier of threat is revealing. Against Doakes, he relied on the code, elaborate surveillance, and literal cages. Against Quinn, he uses social engineering. He leverages Deborah's relationship with Quinn, knowing that Quinn's feelings for her can be weaponized. He nudges office politics, letting internal affairs pressure Quinn when his own past misconduct surfaces, and he subtly feeds Quinn just enough plausible explanations to make backing off feel like Quinn's own choice rather than a defeat. These near suspicions create a constant background pressure. Even when Quinn drops the idea that Dexter might be involved in Rita's death, the show is broadcasting that the mask is thinner. One more dead girlfriend, one more vanished suspect, and those informal questions could have hardened into a real case. The long-term effects of this are crucial. Dexter is no longer coasting on Harry's code as an automatic operating system. Staying 10 steps ahead now requires active maintenance, constant monitoring of who is watching, and emotional triage inside his own department. Quinn then becomes a bridge figure. He proves that it no longer takes a Doakes level of normal couples discuss weekend plans. The mask simply drops. There is no nervous laughter, no attempt to soften the language. Just two killers talking about victims and urges as shared reality. For Dexter, this is an event that changed the emotional rules. The relief of not having to pretend, of not filtering everything through Harry's code, becomes intoxicating. That emotional connection is where Dexter's strategy begins to slip. Harry's code was built on distance. No personal attachments to victims. No unnecessary risk. Every choice measured against exposure. With Hannah, Dexter starts making decisions based on love and loyalty rather than risk minimization. He chooses to kill her abusive ex instead of letting the system handle it. He hides evidence that could put her away. The careful project manager of murder starts bending the operating system Harry designed. We're going to dive deep into those compromises because each one chips away at the 10 steps ahead advantage. Dexter covers for Hannah's crimes when Sal Price closes in, manipulating the investigation and ultimately contributing to Price's death. He allows Hannah into Harrison's life, inviting an unvetted killer into his most vulnerable space, something Harry's training would have never allowed. And he trusts her with the ultimate leverage, knowledge of his identity, his methods, and his family. Information that could destroy him completely if she ever decided to talk. The long-term effects of this are huge. Hannah's presence means Dexter is no longer the only one managing the secret. There is now another killer with independent goals, emotions, and grievances operating inside his world. That instantly multiplies the possible consequences of every move he makes. And then there is Deborah. Hannah's existence forces Deb into an impossible corner, trapped between her duty as a cop and her loyalty to Dexter, especially once she discovers both the truth about Hannah and the truth about Dexter's feelings. The triangle between a detective, a serial killer brother, and his killer lover accelerates the collapse of Dexter's strategic control. The next time Deb is asked to compromise, the cost will be far higher than a bottle of evidence gone missing. Deborah's decision to protect Hannah instead of turning her in was a moral line bending under pressure. The next compromise would not be about a poisoner in custody. It would be about the brother she trusted most, and an event that changed both of their lives in a single night. Let's kick things off. The outline is getting harder to ignore. That pressure finally explodes on the night she follows Dexter to the church. On the surface, it is a very human fear. She thinks he might be cheating, relapsing, spiraling into self-destruction. The camera tracks her from the car to the church doors, and the expectation is domestic drama, not a ritual kill. But when Deborah steps inside, the reversal is brutal. Dexter stands over Travis Marshall, plastic everywhere, knife raised. The tableau is unmistakable. There is no way to rationalize this as police work. In one instant, years of managed perception collapse. Dexter's 10-step lead over Deb disintegrates because this exposure is unplanned, unframed, and undeniable. Deborah's face cycles through disbelief, horror, and a desperate search for any explanation that does not involve her brother being a serial killer. Dexter reacts the only way he can: rapid improvisation. He rushes to reframe the kill as a one-time moral necessity, a final act to stop a monster the system failed to catch. He leans on language from Harry's code without naming it, trying to present this as a single, terrible choice, not a lifelong pattern of victims and trophies. If Deborah can accept this as an isolated break, his entire constructed life might still hold. But the long-term effects of this moment are already in motion. Deb does not arrest him. She does not draw her weapon. Instead, she makes a different, equally dangerous choice: to understand, to fix, to pull Dexter back from the edge rather than push him into a cell. That decision creates a new, volatile equilibrium, and the next step in that path will demand an even darker compromise than anything she has faced in that church. That church decision creates a fragile truce, but Dexter immediately tries to turn it into a system. If Harry's code once organized his entire life, then Deb, knowing the truth, demands a new operating manual. Let's kick things off with Dexter's attempt to onboard Deborah into a modified version of Harry's code. He walks her through his rules, his victim criteria, the way he stalks, tests, and confirms guilt before a kill. In his mind, this is risk management and moral insulation. The code says only those who have killed and will kill again qualify as victims. The ritual, the plastic, the tools, all become evidence that he is not a monster acting on random urges, but a controlled dark passenger following a framework Harry designed. Throughout his life, Dexter believed the code separated him from the predators he hunted. Now he tries to convince Deborah of the same logic. He shows conversations, anticipate her triggers, and protect her legal exposure. When she covers for him at work, he studies her reports, adjusts his own forensic language, and rewrites scenes so that if internal affairs ever digs, her career is shielded before his. The irony is sharp. Deborah, the cop who knows him best, becomes both his greatest liability and his most powerful ally. She can steer investigations away from him with a single redirected lead, can reinterpret blood evidence in ways no one questions because of her reputation. Yet that same access means every misstep he makes now directly implicates her, creating a shared target on their backs. In the long-term effects of this arrangement, the corrosion is obvious. Every compromise Deb makes eats away at her sense of self as a good cop. Every lie Dexter tells to protect her widens the gap between his love and the harm he causes. The code was never designed for two people, and as the pressure mounts, this fragile, co-authored version is already cracking, setting up the next escalation where love, law, and the dark passenger collide in an event that changed both their lives permanently. The co-authored code between Dexter and Deborah is barely holding together when an old ghost in a glass slide quietly re-enters the story. At a new crime scene, LaGuerta bends down, spots a familiar shimmer of plastic, and finds a single blood slide placed with ritual precision. Doakes is already dead. The Bay Harbor butcher case is closed, yet the signature has returned. For LaGuerta, this is not just evidence. It is an event that changed the trajectory of her belief. The department wants to treat it as coincidence or a copycat, but she refuses to accept that Doakes is somehow killing from beyond the grave. Throughout his life, Dexter relied on institutional closure as armor. Once the file was stamped and shelved, the truth felt buried. LaGuerta is the rare character who does not let the narrative around Doakes stay fixed, so she goes backward instead of forward, quietly. No press conferences, no task force, just an experienced captain, alone with old boxes and a growing sense that the story never added up. She reopens Bay Harbor butcher files, cross-references case timelines, and starts laying transparent overlays of dates, locations, and personnel. Time after time, Dexter's name appears at the edges. He processes the blood. He is first on scene. He just happens to be nearby when a suspect disappears. This is where the show lets us see the power of bureaucracy turned against Dexter. The same clean, still improvise, but he cannot easily erase the past. LaGuerta's determination to clear Doakes' name does more than threaten Dexter's freedom. It pulls Deborah's fractured loyalties into the spotlight. Every file Lagerta reopens is pressure on Deb's already breaking moral compass, setting up a collision where love, law, and the long-term effects of Dexter's choices finally converge in a deadly confrontation neither of them can fully control. LaGuerta's investigation into Dexter and the Bay Harbor butcher leads to the most brutal expression of Harry's code. All the quiet files and late-night suspicions converge in one loud, echoing space: a shipping yard, a container, and a choice that destroys any illusion that this code can stay clean. Let's kick things off with the setup. Lagerta stages a trap, luring Dexter to the very kind of place that created him: a shipping container wired for a takedown instead of a kill room. But Dexter has been 10 steps ahead for too long to walk in blind. He drugs Estrada, manipulates the scene, and turns Lagerta's sting into a counterframe, positioning her as the cop who snapped and tried to execute a criminal off the books. When Deborah arrives, she doesn't walk into a simple good versus evil showdown. She walks into a tableau where Dexter and Lagerta are both holding guns, both holding competing versions of the truth, and every lie Dexter has ever told is hanging in the air. The strategic stakes in that container are absolute. If Lagerta lives, Dexter's entire life is over, not just his cover at Miami Metro, but every hidden kill room, every blood slide, every victim the justice system never discovered. There is no scenario where Lagerta quietly backs down. Clearing Doakes' name means exposing the Bay Harbor butcher, which means exposing Harry's training, Dexter's dark passenger, and Deborah's role in covering up Travis Marshall's death. The system Harry once served will dissect Dexter's history, his family, his code. There is no partial damage control, no surgical confession. It is total exposure. That is what makes Deborah's choice so devastating. Faced with Dexter begging her to kill him, and Lagerta ordering her to arrest him, Deb does something Harry's code was explicitly built to avoid. She shoots Lagerta. In that instant, Deb becomes the one who crosses the line Harry always insisted on. Never kill an innocent. Never let the code claim collateral victims. Throughout his life, Dexter was trained to believe the code protected the people he loved from his urges. In reality, is there anything left for him to protect? Lagerta's death doesn't just close a case. It exposes the silent third character that has been in every scene with Dexter and Deborah: Harry's code. Up to this point, the code has been treated as a survival manual, a moral compromise, and a family secret. Now we're going to dive deep into whether it actually protected anyone, or simply delayed the explosion. Let's kick things off with the argument that the code worked. Throughout his life, Dexter is not a chaotic killer. Harry drills into him that there must be proof, a pattern, and a plan. Staged crime scenes in Dexter's childhood become training grounds where he learns to think like a cop and a criminal at the same time. That structure channels the urges into a checklist. Confirm the victims are killers. Isolate them. Control the environment. Erase the evidence. The fear of getting caught is not abstract. It is rehearsed, measured, almost ritualized. This would be the start of Dexter's near-error-proof operating system. Blood spatter analysis gives him access to crime scenes and case files. The blood slide trophies are cataloged like police evidence. Careful victim vetting saves him from killing the innocent, and meticulous cleanup prevents trace contamination. When Sergeant Doakes discovers the slide box, the code's rules about secrecy and contingency planning kick in. Dexter relocates kill sites, adjusts routines, and survives a level of scrutiny that would have destroyed a more impulsive predator. But the same code that restrains him also flatters him. By insisting that only deserving victims qualify, Harry hands Dexter a moral fig leaf and a sense of superiority. Dexter is not just a man with urges. He is a necessary evil that the broken justice system cannot live without. That identity lets the dark passenger masquerade as public service. The code becomes less a leash and more a crown. We see the danger when Dexter bends those rules. With Trinity, he violates the principle of distance and discipline, embedding himself in Arthur Mitchell's family out of morbid curiosity and a hunger for connection. The delay in following the code's mandate to kill a known serial killer leads directly to Rita's murder, an event that changed Dexter's life and permanently scars Harrison. With Laguerta, the code's line against killing innocents erodes under pressure. Dexter's willingness to let Deborah pull the trigger shows how far the code has been weaponized to protect the killer, not the public. There is a darker question underneath all of this. Did Harry make a mistake? Throughout his life, he treated feelings as camouflage, not as real motivations. In Season 8, that separation breaks down. Deborah's guilt after killing Laguerta, Dexter's protective attachment to Dr. Vogel, and his renewed relationship with Hannah push him into decisions driven by panic and affection rather than calculated risk. He is more emotionally entangled, less willing to walk away, and that shift bleeds directly into his process. Earlier in the series, every kill was rehearsed. Surveillance, background checks, controlled environments. In Season 8, we see rushed kills and corner cutting that would have been unthinkable under peak code Dexter. The hit on the hitman El Sapo is a clear example. A spontaneous parking lot attack. No plastic, no controlled room, no meticulous disposal. When Dexter knifes him in the front seat of a car, he leaves a chaotic scene that relies on luck and police incompetence rather than design. The careful project manager of murder starts to look like an overextended freelancer taking shortcuts. His surveillance also degrades. With Saxon, the brain surgeon, Dexter repeatedly underestimates his opponent. He breaks into Saxon's space without the exhaustive pattern tracking that once defined him, misses cameras, and ends up on video in a suspect's home. The man who used to erase every trace now generates evidence that others can follow. Even his disposal work weakens. Bodies and crime scenes feel less like pristine rituals and more like hurried cleanups squeezed between family obligations. That pressure comes from his competing dream, a normal life with Hannah and Harrison. For the first time, Dexter is actively planning a future beyond Miami, imagining a self not ruled by the dark passenger. Plane tickets, escape routes, daydreams of domestic peace all crowd the mental space once reserved for contingency plans and backup kill sites. The system that Harry built demanded total focus. Dexter no longer has that. Every hour spent forging a new identity for Hannah is an hour not spent anticipating Saxon's next move. New antagonists exploit this erosion. Vogel flatters and analyzes him, pulling him into therapy-like conversations that slow his responses and make him question his own nature. Saxon studies Dexter's patterns, strikes at Deborah, and forces Dexter into reactive mode, chasing crises instead of orchestrating them. For the first time since Doakes, Dexter is not dictating the tempo, he is scrambling. This decline is not simple incompetence. It is the natural endpoint of a life who only kills other predators. Throughout his life, Dexter believed the code grew out of Harry's love and desperation, a father trying to save his damaged son. Vogel reframes that origin. She praises Dexter's control, calls his dark passenger beautiful, and labels him a rare, successful outcome. That clinical admiration flatters him. For someone who always feared being a monster, being told he is a masterpiece has a powerful pull. At the same time, it unsettles him because it implies his life was never about compassion, only about managing risk. This would be the start of Dexter questioning whether he is a moral agent or a constructed tool. Vogel treats him like a case study, not a son. When she talks about the code, it sounds less like a conscience and more like a behavioral protocol. If Dexter is an experiment, how much of his apparent choice to kill only guilty victims is really his choice? The more he leans into Vogel's language, the easier it becomes to imagine that responsibility lies with Harry and Vogel, not with the man holding the knife. Strategically, Vogel seems to make Dexter even more effective. She gives him new frameworks for understanding psychopathy, offers justifications for his urges, and helps profile the brain surgeon. But her reappearance also drags in a variable he does not control, her estranged son, Oliver Saxon. Vogel insists Saxon is a different kind of predator, one who never accepted a code, and Dexter initially believes he can manage this threat like any other. That confidence is misplaced. Vogel's death at Saxon's hands is an event that changed Dexter's trajectory. She dies in front of him, a literal architect of his life, cut down by the failed counterpart. To her, success. The long-term effects of that moment are huge. If the experiment that worked is Dexter, and the experiment that failed is Saxon, what does it mean that both leave a trail of bodies and destroyed lives? That question pushes Dexter toward a final, drastic conclusion. Maybe the only way to protect what remains of his family is to remove himself from the equation altogether. But as Saxon closes in, and Deborah is pulled deeper into the crossfire, Dexter's belief that he can still control the consequences of his existence will face its most brutal test yet. Oliver Saxon is where the experiment finally breaks. The careful system Harry built, the clinical language Dr. Vogel used, the fantasy that a code could tame a killer, all collide with a version of Dexter always paid by someone else. As the hunt escalates, Dexter's pursuit of Saxon stops looking like a disciplined application of the code. It becomes personal. He isn't meticulously vetting a file. He is chasing the man who shot Deborah, who shattered the fragile future he imagined for both of them. The kill Dexter plans is not about balancing a ledger. It is about revenge, closure, and a desperate attempt to end the cycle of collateral damage that has followed him from Brian to Doakes to Lagerta and now to Deb. That desperation is clearest in the hospital confrontation. Dexter walks into Saxon's room, fully aware of the security cameras, the guards, the chain of evidence that would normally terrify the forensic analyst who built his life on never getting caught. He provokes Saxon, lets him lunge with a pen, and then drives a knife into his carotid in full view of the system Harry taught him to evade. In that moment, the 10-step lead disappears. There is no plastic, no prepared kill room, no escape plan, only a single, brutal choice. By killing Saxon so openly, Dexter silently admits that the larger structure is unsalvageable. The code cannot protect Deborah. His planning cannot outpace every enemy. Removing the immediate threat is all he has left. And once Saxon is gone, the real question becomes unavoidable. If Dexter can no longer stay ahead of the consequences, does he have any right to stay in anyone's life at all? With Saxon dead in the holding cell, the external threat is gone, but the damage to Dexter's world is already irreversible. The real cost of all those years of control, concealment, and calculation is about to surface in the hospital corridor, not the interrogation room. Let's kick things off with the chain that leads to Deborah on that operating table. Throughout his life, Dexter believed Harry's code could keep his dark passenger pointed outward, away from the people he loved. But Lagerta's investigation into the Bay Harbor butcher, her discovery of the blood slides, and her plan to expose the truth cornered Dexter into an execution in the shipping yard. Deborah's choice to kill LaGuerta to protect Dexter is an event that changed the trajectory of her entire life. From that moment, Deb is no longer just a cop. She is collateral in Dexter's private war. That killing pulls her deeper into his orbit. It makes her vulnerable to Vogel, to the legacy of the Bay Harbor butcher, and eventually to Saxon. That only guilty victims died. That innocent life stayed untouched. Yet, the most innocent person in Dexter's emotional world, the one who loved him before and after she discovered his truth, dies because he existed as a killer at all. Her addiction spiral, her career implosion, her final wound in that parking lot, all trace back to the decision to manage his urges instead of confronting them. By letting Deborah die and then disappearing her into the hurricane, Dexter loses his last emotional anchor and finally accepts a truth he has resisted throughout his life. He cannot be both executioner and guardian. His presence corrodes everything it touches. The only question left is what a man built on control does, when the only responsible choice might be to remove himself entirely. With Deborah gone and the hurricane bearing down on Miami, Dexter finally does what Harry's code never prepared him for. He plans his own disappearance as carefully as any kill. No plastic sheeting, no blood slides, just a boat, a storm, and a body that will never be discovered. Let's kick things off with the image that closes the Miami chapter of his life. Dexter steers the slice of life straight into the heart of the hurricane, leaving behind a perfectly framed narrative for Miami Metro. The Bay Harbor butcher has died at sea. The wreckage and the storm do all the forensic work for him. The man who once manipulated blood spatter reports now weaponizes an act of God crime scene, trusting that no one will question a death that is both tragic and convenient. On paper, the case closes itself. Throughout his life, Dexter used Harry's training to stay 10 steps ahead of every investigation. Here, he uses the same skill set to erase Dexter Morgan entirely. It is absolutely in character. A clean exit, no loose ends, a story that protects his victims' families, his colleagues, and the fragile myths they built around him. Yet, it is also a radical break. To make the cover story work, he abandons Harrison and Hannah in Argentina, cutting off the very future he once killed to protect. The man who structured every choice around shielding his son now treats himself as the final problem that must be removed. This would be the start of Dexter's most extreme strategy, total subtraction. When the narrative jumps to the lumberjack reveal, we are no longer in a world of police briefings, lab reports, and kill room rehearsals. Dexter lives alone in a remote logging town, under an assumed identity, working a brutal, anonymous job. No more Miami Metro, no more family dinners, no more code, enforced by Harry's ghost Deborah's conscience or any external system. Stage for any return to connection to feel like a catastrophic breach of the very system he built to contain himself. That self-imposed exile exposes the core illusion of Dexter's entire system: control. Throughout his life, Dexter believed being 10 steps ahead meant mastering every variable, from blood spatter on the walls to the expressions on the faces of the people who loved him. Control over evidence, control over narratives, control over who got close enough to see the truth. Let's kick things off with Harry, because Harry's code is Dexter's original fantasy of control. Harry trains him to think like a cop and a killer at the same time, staging mock crime scenes and drilling protocols so no kill leaves a trace. Dexter learns to treat his urges as a technical problem to be managed, but Harry discovering the kill room with the nurse is an event that changed everything. In that single moment, Harry confronts the reality his system cannot sanitize, the horror of an actual victim on an actual table. Harry's suicide is the first crack in Dexter's belief that a perfect code can protect everyone. Brian Moser widens that crack. Dexter assumes his dark passenger is uniquely contained by rules and ritual. Brian proves the darkness is also genetic, emotional, and seductive. The biological brother who shares the same childhood trauma becomes a variable the code cannot absorb. Dexter's choice to kill Brian saves Deborah, but it also exposes the limit of control. He cannot be both loyal brother and disciplined avenger without destroying someone. From there, every person who discovers or suspects the truth brings a new failure point. Doakes sees through the harmless lab tech persona and locks Dexter in a cabin. Lundy's relentless profiling closes in on the Bay Harbor butcher. Rita's questions about late nights and lies grow louder. Deborah's therapy sessions and mounting doubts turn into direct confrontation in the church. LaGuerta follows the bloodslide evidence. Hannah understands and even accepts the killer inside him. Each one introduces emotions, agendas, and timing Dexter cannot fully predict. We're going to dive deep into that pattern because the series keeps proving that no system, no matter how well designed, can anticipate every collision of human feeling and random chance. Leela's obsession turns Doakes into a framed victim. Miguel Prado turns vigilante justice into ego-driven murder. Zach Hamilton, groomed as a controlled apprentice, ends up dead before the code can fix him. The long-term effects of every controlled decision are wildly uncontrolled. Morally, murder by Trinity is an event that changed the entire emotional landscape of the series, proving Dexter's double life could annihilate the people he loved. LaGuerta's execution on the shipping container, Deborah's psychological collapse afterward, and finally, Deborah's death in the hospital, each escalate the cost of Dexter's survival until the price is almost cosmic. So, here's the checkpoint for this video. At what moment does Dexter stop being untouchable and start playing permanent catch-up? At what point does the careful hunter turn into cornered prey, operating in pure survival mode rather than strategic mastery? There are several candidates. For some viewers, it might be the underwater grave discovery, when divers pull up barrel after barrel and the Bay Harbor butcher becomes a citywide myth. That is the day Dexter's perfect disposal system is publicly exposed, even if his name is not attached yet. Others might choose Trinity's escape from Dexter's kill room, the night when Dexter underestimates a target and gives him enough time to kill Rita, permanently shattering the fantasy that the code can protect his family. For many, the real turning point is Deborah seeing the church, walking in on Dexter, killing Travis Marshall on the altar. That single image detonates the entire architecture of lies with one cut, transforming Deborah from shield to witness. Another option is Lagerta, finding the blood slide at the church, the tiny piece of glass that resurrects Bay Harbor butcher suspicions and turns institutional power directly against him. Or, for some, the moment is even later. Saxon shooting Deborah, when Dexter's presence directly leads to the irreversible loss of the person he was trying to save. Here is the challenge. Pick that moment mentally, then test it against the show's structure. What changes in Dexter's behavior before and after that point? Before, Harry's code functions like an operating system. Rehearsed rituals, clean kill rooms, forensic awareness, and emotional detachment. After, patterns begin to fray. Impulse overrides planning. The dark passenger starts reacting, not orchestrating. In the final sections, we're going to dive deep into that shift, tracking how each discovery erodes Dexter's lead and reframes the entire arc from master strategist to man drowning in the wake of his own victims. If Dexter's planning made him look 10 steps ahead, Harry and Deborah are where the illusion cracks. They are the two people who discovered the truth beneath the mask, and together they form the moral mirror that finally catches up to him. Harry comes first, and he comes as Arden, who ever made her feel safe. From childhood into the homicide division, she reads his quiet as stability, not predation. Her language for him is emotional, not technical. She sees his humanity first, and, when the truth is finally discovered, his monstrosity second. That is why her awakening is an event that changed the entire series. The church scene with Travis Marshall shatters her sense of reality. In one instant, Dexter goes from protective brother to active killer. Every memory is retroactively contaminated. Where Harry responded to the first kill by designing a code, Deborah responds by breaking down, questioning the justice system, her career, and her own judgment. The long-term effects of that moment ripple through every season after. As Harry's ghost keeps justifying, Deborah's living reactions become Dexter's externalized conscience. Her horror at the bodies, her revulsion at his lies, her desperate attempts to make him stop killing, generate the only shame that ever really lands. Gradually, the show shifts authority away from Harry and toward Deborah. Early on, Dexter asks what Harry would say. By the end, he is haunted more by what Deborah has already said. So when Dexter finally exiles himself, the decision is not about perfecting the code. It is about honoring what Deborah's life and death revealed, that his existence carries a cost no rulebook can sanitize. The next phase of the story will push that realization even further, as every remaining connection forces him to confront whether being 10 steps ahead ever truly erased the blood on his hands. That cost becomes clearest when the system finally starts to close in, not through random chance, but through two very different hunters inside Miami Metro. To understand why Dexter stayed 10 steps ahead for so long, we're going to dive deep into the contrast between Sergeant Doakes and Lieutenant Lagerta, and how each almost forced his dark passenger into the light. Let's kick things off with Doakes, because he represents the raw, on-the-ground threat. From the beginning, Doakes does not need files or timelines to sense danger. His body reacts. He watches Dexter at crime scenes, sees the flat effect, hears the wrong jokes at the wrong time, and his instincts scream that Dexter is not harmless. Throughout his life, Dexter relied on social camouflage, But Doakes is the one cop immune to it. He tails Dexter, breaks into his apartment, and finally discovers the bloodslide box, translating gut suspicion into hard evidence. Doakes' method is intimate and rule-breaking. La misdirection, and physical containment are not enough. He manipulates evidence, replants blood-slides, and uses his forensic expertise to contaminate her conclusions. At the same time, he leans into political maneuvering, exploiting office alliances, Deborah's loyalty, and Lagerta's reputation for ambition to make her look biased. The same access that once let him erase his own footprints now lets him rewrite the official record aimed at exposing him. Both Doakes and Lagerta nearly discover the full truth, and both die because Dexter's survival always outweighs their pursuit of justice. The long-term effects of these deaths are brutal. 2 of Miami Metro's best cops are removed. The institution absorbs the loss, and the Bay Harbor Butcher legend remains a closed case. The comparison underlines the show's cynical view of institutions. Whether the threat comes from a soldier in the field or a commander at a desk, a killer with enough access, time, and willingness to cross lines, they will not and still walk away clean. The next escalation will only deepen that indictment, as later hunters inherit the same broken system and pay the same price for getting too close. If the last section showed how institutions fail to catch a predator like Dexter, this one shows how intimacy fails to protect the people closest to him. Throughout his life, Dexter's greatest cover and his greatest liability were the same: the women who loved him without fully understanding the blast radius he carried into their lives. Let's kick things off with Rita. On the surface, she is the perfect shield. Her innocence, her routine, her quiet domestic life create a camouflage Dexter could never build alone. As a single mom recovering from abuse, she expects very little from him, emotionally, which gives Dexter time and freedom to kill while appearing like a gentle, healing partner. Her house in the suburbs, the kids, the barbecues with the neighbors, all of it sells the illusion that the blood spatter analyst is just a shy, slightly offbeat family man. But that same ignorance is exactly what makes Rita vulnerable. She has no concept of the code, the dark passenger, or the caliber of enemies Dexter creates. When Dexter underestimates Arthur Mitchell, the Trinity killer, he assumes the threat is contained. Trinity is focused on his ritual, on his own victims, on his own family facade. Dexter thinks he can dismantle that pattern without exposing his own. This would be the start of a fatal miscalculation. Because Rita does not know capacity for violence makes her a more dangerous partner, because escalation becomes a mutual habit rather than a solitary relapse. Emotionally, these 2 relationships pull Dexter in opposite directions. Rita is the promise of a life Harry might have wanted for him. Kids, domestic stability, urges pushed into the background. Hannah is the promise of self-acceptance. No more lies, no more pretending that the code erased who he is. The tragic truth is that both paths lead to the same outcome. Rita dies because she does not know. Hannah survives only by embracing the danger. Either way, anyone who steps into Dexter's orbit lives inside a blast radius they cannot fully see, setting the stage for the next wave of collateral damage in his story. Everyone who steps into Dexter's orbit enters that unseen blast radius, but only a few ever get close enough to the core to feel the full heat of the dark passenger. So, who actually posed the greatest real threat to exposing Dexter, not just in theory, but in terms of will, opportunity, and power to bring his life crashing down. Let's kick things off with Sergeant Doakes, because throughout his life in Miami Metro, no one locked onto Dexter's urges with more raw, unfiltered suspicion. Doakes follows him, confronts him, refuses to be gaslit by the harmless lab geek act. He finds the blood slide box. He corners Dexter in the Everglades cabin. Physically, this is as close as any cop ever gets. The Bay Harbor butcher, tied up, identified, and at gunpoint. But Doakes has almost no institutional leverage. Branded as aggressive and unstable, with no backup and no paper trail, his truth dies with him. In that explosion, Lila engineers, an event that changed the entire investigation. On the other end of the spectrum sits La Guerta, where Doakes has instinct, she has paperwork and persistence. After Doakes' death, she quietly reopens the Bay Harbor butcher case, tracks fuel receipts, boat records, old case files, and those tiny inconsistencies in Dexter's work history. She links the butcher to the marina. She finds the slide in Travis Marshall's church. On paper, she gets closer than anyone. La Guerta is inches from assembling a narrative that the system would have to believe. Her problem is timing and isolation. By the time she confronts Dexter and Deborah in that shipping container, the only witnesses are the very people she is accusing. Then there's Deborah, who gets closest, emotionally and morally. The lead discovers Dexter. As an institutional critique, Doakes represents the system's last honest alarm. In the next section, we're going to dive deep into how Dexter stayed 10 steps ahead of all of them, and why, despite so many near exposures, the Bay Harbor butcher survives as long as he does. So if La Guerta, Deborah, and Doakes are the big existential threats, how does Dexter keep winning inside the very building designed to catch killers? To answer that, we need a pattern interrupt. Imagine Miami Metro, not as a heroic crime lab, but as a painfully familiar workplace where the serial killer is just the quiet guy in the next cubicle. Throughout his life, Dexter survives because Miami Metro behaves like a dysfunctional office. Red flags are everywhere, but everyone is busy, biased, or conflict averse. He disappears at odd hours, shows up at brutal scenes, almost energized, and makes morbid jokes about dismemberment. Yet, these are brushed off as quirks, the way colleagues excuse the unsettling coworker, because confronting the truth would be disruptive. The dark passenger hides in plain sight, because the culture rewards going along to get along. Let's kick things off with how often Dexter's behavior is neutralized by banter. Masuka turned almost any concern into a sexual joke. Deborah calls Dexter a freak with affection, using humor as a pressure valve instead of an investigative tool. When Doakes says, "There's something off about that guy," it lands as personality conflict, not a genuine HR-level alarm. Concerns about burnout, trauma, and stress get airtime, but no one pushes into the deeper question. Why does Dexter seem almost too comfortable around mutilated victims? Office politics make this blindness worse. La Guerta's ambition drives her toward high-profile arrests and favorable narratives. Batista's promotions and romantic entanglements pull him into managing morale and appearances. Deborah is fighting for respect in a sexist environment, constantly overcompensating to prove she belongs. All of that noise drowns out subtle warning signs about Dexter. A blood spatter analyst who is always near major cases should be a statistical anomaly. Instead, he is a reliable team player who never rocks the boat, This is where Dexter's true superpower emerges. It is not the kill room, or the plastic, or even Harry's code. It is his understanding of how institutions prioritize convenience over truth. Harry trains him to think like a cop, but Dexter evolves that training into a corporate survival strategy. He learns that as long as he supports the dominant his performance like a coach, Harry is teaching precision, teaching evidence control, teaching survival, but he is also teaching that the dark passenger must never be exposed to the light. Throughout his life, Dexter interprets this not as a temporary measure, but as a permanent way of living. Kill, clean, hide, repeat. The long-term effects of that compromise echo through every major relationship. When the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation closes in, framing Doakes looks like a masterstroke. Lila burns the cabin, Doakes dies, and Dexter walks away. A short-term escape. But the consequences are structural. A good cop is dead. Miami Metro learns the wrong lesson, and Dexter discovers that innocent men can be sacrificed to protect his secret. From that point on, the code is no longer just about guilty victims. It silently expands to include anyone who discovers the truth. Lying to Rita follows the same pattern. Marriage, kids, and the white picket cover story seem to humanize Dexter, but they are built on withheld truth. Every late night, every unexplained absence turns domestic life into an alibi factory. When Rita is murdered by Trinity, that original decision not to reveal his nature becomes an event that changed everything. Dexter's double life does not just endanger abstract strangers, it kills the person who believed in him most. Lagerta's investigation into the Bay Harbor Butcher is another pivot. She is right about Dexter, methodical in how she connects the blood slides, the marina, the pattern. On the docks, and then in the shipping container, Dexter faces a genuine alternative. Accept exposure, or kill a colleague who represents the law Harry once served. By choosing to let Deborah shoot LaGuerta, he crosses a line Harry never wrote into the code. Now the secret demands family blood. Involving Deborah is the most devastating compromise. Once she discovers Dexter in the church with Travis Marshall, every attempt to manage her trauma requires more lies, more bodies, more manipulation of cases she works. Her career collapses, her moral compass shatters, and Dexter's world shrinks to a handful of unsafe codependent connections. By the final seasons, Dexter still appears 10 steps ahead in tactical moments, staging crime scenes, redirecting suspects, vanishing evidence. But strategically, his life has become a maze with no exits that do not require sacrifice. Rita gone, Doakes and LaGuerta dead, Deborah destroyed, Harrison endangered, colleagues increasingly suspicious. Exile and the storm's aftermath is not a shocking twist. In many workplaces, the person who makes problems go away is granted leeway, and difficult questions are postponed indefinitely. That leeway becomes dangerous when combined with specialized knowledge. Harry trains Dexter to think like both a cop and a predator, staging crime scenes when Dexter is still a child. This would be the start of an asymmetry of power that never closes. As an adult, Dexter controls blood evidence, understands chain of custody, and knows exactly how to erase his own footprints. He walks his colleagues through scenes he has already curated, translating stains and patterns into a narrative only he can fully verify. In any complex system, the expert who owns the data and the explanation holds enormous power, especially when transparency is weak. On top of that, Miami Metro runs on charismatic narratives more than on raw evidence. Harry's belief in the code becomes an internal legend, a justification that allows a decorated cop to train a killer and call it protection. LaGuerta's Bay Harbor butcher story, first blaming Doakes and later circling back to Dexter, is treated as political maneuvering until it is too late. Deborah's faith in Dexter, built over a lifetime of emotional dependence, outweighs every contradictory clue she discovers. The dark passenger is not only Dexter's inner voice, it is also the seductive story each authority figure tells to avoid facing the full truth. Seen this way, Dexter's long run of success looks less like superhuman genius and more like the logical outcome of predictable weaknesses. Trust in star performers, deference to experts, loyalty to mentors and family, fear of rocking the boat. When those habits stack, a hidden predator can operate in plain sight. As an unintentional case study, the series underlines why robust oversight, protected whistleblowers, and a culture of questioning are necessary safeguards. Without them, Harry's code replaces law. LaGuerta's concerns are dismissed as ambition, and Deborah's loyalty becomes a weapon turned against her own life. In the next section, we're going to dive deep into how Dexter's story forces a confrontation with what real accountability would look like for someone who has lived this far beyond consequences. From a distance, Dexter Morgan looks untouchable. The quiet, blood-spatter analyst who outsmarts cops, killers, and fate itself, always gliding away from exposure at the last second. But when we're going to dive deep into 8 seasons and beyond, that image starts to crack, revealing a man who is less an all-powerful mastermind and jurisdictional boundaries. Third, premeditated kill planning. Dexter's rituals, from plastic-wrapped rooms to backup escape routes, make each kill feel like a controlled experiment. He scouts victims, tracks routines, and builds redundancies so that when something goes wrong, he has already rehearsed the response. The blood slides hidden in the air conditioner vent, mirror police evidence storage, a private archive that keeps his dark passenger organized and contained. But the domains where he is ahead are not the domains that ultimately matter. Dexter is never 10 steps ahead of emotional consequences, long-term fallout, or the unpredictable choices of people who love or hate him. Harry's suicide after seeing a kill room is an event that changed Dexter's entire understanding of the code, yet Dexter never fully processes the long-term effects of that moment. Rita's murder, Deborah walking into the church and seeing Travis Marshall on the table, LaGuerta's relentless suspicion. These are not failures of planning. They are failures of imagination about human pain. His invincibility is also built on luck and on other people's reluctance to confront the truth they have already discovered in their gut. Doakes is isolated and framed. LaGuerta is dismissed as ambitious. Deborah spends years translating instinct into denial because the alternative would destroy her life. Dexter survives because the system is overworked, because colleagues cling to the harmless lab geek mask, and because love, loyalty, and bureaucracy all move slower than his next kill. So, was Dexter really 10 steps ahead? He was 10 steps ahead of the system, but never 10 steps ahead of the human cost. That bill simply took years to come due. And in the next section, we're going to dive deep into what true accountability would demand from someone who has lived that long beyond consequences. That bill comes due in the most brutal way possible, through the bodies, exiles, and broken lives of everyone who ever brushed against the truth. Throughout his life, Dexter's secret doesn't just sit in the background, it detonates. Harry's discovery of those early urges to kill leads to the code, but it also leads to Harry's suicide after he walks in on a kill room and finally sees what he created. That single moment is an event that changed every relationship that followed, because Harry becomes both the first accomplice and the first casualty of knowing Dexter too well. Brian Moser reaches the same truth from the opposite direction. He recognizes Dexter's dark passenger, accepts of a chain of choices that began with Harry and the code. Hannah is forced into exile, living on the run in Argentina, defined not by her own crimes, but by the danger of staying close to Dexter. Harrison is abandoned more than once, first left with Hannah, then ultimately orphaned in New Blood, carrying a legacy he never chose. When we line these outcomes up, almost everyone who truly engages with Dexter's secret either dies, is driven away, or is permanently scarred. The hidden life that makes Dexter feel powerful is toxic to everyone else in the room. His greatest skill, staying 10 steps ahead, guarantees that no one can fully know and love him without risking destruction. Every near catch from our opening montage wasn't just a thriller beat, it was a warning sign. Evidence of a moral debt quietly accumulating interest. So, as this story closes, Dexter stops looking like a cool anti-hero and starts to read as a cautionary figure about the limits of control and the inevitability of consequences. And if this is the human cost of knowing him, what would real accountability demand from the man at the center of it all? And that brings the focus back to the audience, because every viewer has a personal moment when Dexter stops feeling like an untouchable mastermind and starts looking like someone in free fall. Throughout his life, Dexter believed Harry's code would keep him 10 steps ahead, but at some point, that illusion cracks, and the exact fracture point says a lot about how the story is being read. So let's kick things off with a direct question. When did it truly feel like Dexter wasn't ahead anymore? For some, the answer lands hard in the Trinity season, the moment Rita's body is discovered in the bathtub and the pattern flips. Dexter thought he had controlled a fellow killer, only to realize the dark passenger in front of him was always one move further along the board. Others trace that loss of control to Lagerta, quietly reopening the Bay Harbor butcher case, cross-checking gas receipts and shipping records, while Dexter scrambles to erase years of supposed perfection. For many viewers, the real breaking point is Deborah in the church, watching Dexter kill Travis Marshall, and hearing the truth in real time, rather than through investigation. That scene does not just expose the secret, it collapses the emotional firewall Harry tried to build between Dexter and his closest relationships. But some will argue the decline starts even earlier, with tiny lapses, the blood slide box Doakes discovers, the sloppy tailing of Trinity, or confrontation. To keep this analytical series going, suggestions are crucial. Which character should receive a full breakdown next? Doakes as the relentless truth-teller, Deborah as the collateral soul, Trinity as the mirror Dexter misread, or Lagerta as the methodical investigator who nearly unraveled everything? Comments help decide where we're going to dive deep next. And for anyone who wants more long-form, forensic-style breakdowns of character psychology and narrative strategy, liking, subscribing, and sharing signals that this kind of close reading of Dexter and other shows is worth continuing. So, as we pull back from every reveal, every close call, and every body that almost exposed Dexter. One last contrast keeps echoing. The same hands that carried pink boxes of donuts into Miami Metro also wrapped plastic around kill rooms at midnight. Throughout his life, Dexter rehearsed normalcy with the same discipline he used to rehearse murder. Office donuts, backyard barbecues with Rita, bedtime stories for Harrison. Each ritual was a soft focus montage, so laid over a hard reality of knives, duct tape, and blood slides hidden in an air conditioner vent. That dissonance is not an accident. It is the engine of the show's unease, the reminder that a devoted father can walk straight from tucking in his son to stalking his next victims. Part of why Dexter still lingers in pop culture is that this gap between appearance and truth feels uncomfortably close. Everyone in his orbit sensed something was off, but the mask held because the role was familiar. Helpful coworker, shy boyfriend, awkward dad. The fear underneath the narrative is simple and brutal. If Harry could live beside this darkness and convince himself a code made it manageable, what does that say about how easily families, workplaces, and communities can explain away the unthinkable? Let's kick things off with that broader question of masks and roles, because Dexter turns it into a systemic pattern. At Miami Metro, he weaponizes reliability. At home, he performs tenderness. With Deborah, he plays the damaged but redeemable brother. Everyone around him adapts to the performance, building their own lives around a person who does not fully exist. The show keeps asking whether anyone is ever fully discovered, or whether every relationship is a negotiation between who someone is and who they are allowed to be in order to function. We're going to dive deep for a moment into the cost of that. Harry's code promised control. Kill only those who deserve it,